Hi, this is Libby and Gracia. Welcome to the IBM Champion Chat today. I am the program director for the IBM Champions program. IBM Champions are the top non-IBMer, business partner, customer, consultant, experts and advocates who are out there helping you make the best decisions around your IBM technology, support communities, create amazing content. And we've brought a group of them together here to talk to you about security, from everything from the mainframe to data to power to how Guardian protects you, and we will introduce them in just a minute. For now, let me encourage you to come back twice a month to join the IBM Champion Chat series. We have a replay from our previous episode available. That one brought together a couple of champion experts on podcasting to have a conversation there. So today we're going to be talking, as I said, about security. And I'd like to start by bringing in my co-host, Luke Shantz. And Luke, you know, I'm really excited about today's talk. And I know that you just did an origin story, a podcast with Rosalind Radcliffe about her, like I said, origin story and her work in security. Is there anything that she talked about that you're anxious to hear today related to that?
Yes. Well, thanks for having me back, Libby. I always this is one of my favorite things to do is live stream with the champions. Yeah. So Rosalind was talking about DevSecOps, and particularly from a Z perspective, but how it relates to hybrid cloud now, right? So it was at a cloud native security conference, and she's talking about, you know, dev security ops from a Z perspective. So I would love to hear what our guests have to say about this topic.
Awesome. Well, speaking of our guests, let's bring them on and let them introduce themselves. We have 4 IBM champions with us today: Julie Berg, Jackie Lynch, Byron Smith, and Tim Tate. Julie, can I start with you? Will you introduce yourself, please? Then we'll just pass it around.
Sure. Thank you, Libby. Thank you for inviting me here today. My name is Julie Berg. I'm a worldwide lead security architect for Rocket Software, helping customers around the world. Prior to that, I worked for IBM for numerous years, and I was actually a worldwide Z security champion when I was working at IBM. And I've been talking to all levels of customers, from the CXOs all the way down to people in the trenches, about mainframe security, as well as other security that's off platform, whether what I just usually call distributed, etc.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Julie. Jackie, maybe you'll introduce yourself next.
Okay, well, thanks first of all for inviting me. My name's Jackie Lynch, and I am a computer consultant at this point. I have over 25 years as a customer, and then a bunch of years working for business partners, and I work as a consultant now. My background is initially mainframe from the late 70s through to the late 90s. About 1993, I started working on Unix, and that's pretty much taken over my world. My security background really started in New Zealand with disaster recovery, which we pretty much started with the fact that everybody was dead because we had a big earthquake. And because it's an earthquake zone. So a lot of the things that I do in security go way beyond just like authentication and authorization. And I think we're going to talk more about that later. So that's pretty much my background.
Awesome. Thanks so much, Jackie. I love the fact, and we will talk about this later, but I love the fact that we have such varied perspectives on security here and so many different ways of kind of approaching it. Byron, why don't you introduce yourself next?
Okay. First things first, thank you. And it's always a pleasure to speak. Good afternoon, good morning, good evening to all our viewers out there. My name is Byron Smith. I'm a mainframe security engineer at M&T Bank. I've been in the mainframe space for roughly a decade now, and I've been particularly in security, will be 4 years come August of next month. So this is awesome. It's a pleasure to be in security. And I'm also IBM champion for the past 2 years for IBM Z and IBM Security. And in addition to that, I'm also an advocate and also a member of National Society of Black Engineers, where I also advocate and assist with recruiting at M&T. So, I'm pretty much all over the place, but security is definitely one of the things that I like. And it's different. Security is one of those things where you have to kind of be of a jack of all trades, because security is a big umbrella to discuss. And with all of us today, we're definitely going to be taking so much different point of views to discuss our views in security and how we've engaged with clients or customers or colleagues at different levels. And one last thing to share is I'm also a member of the shared Mainframe Conference Security Committee as well. So that's pretty much me in a nutshell.
Awesome. Thanks, Byron. And last but certainly not least, Tim.
Thanks, Libby. And honored to be here with all these IBM champions that like you said, have a vast background in varying technologies and security. So I work for Great American Insurance based out of Cincinnati. I'm a senior security analyst focused on database activity monitoring and security, mainly using the Guardium technology. Been using it for about 10 years, and excited to share my experience around data security.
Awesome. So one of the things I want to let our listeners know and remind our guests, basically the way we'll do this is just we're going to have a conversation. I have some questions that, we kind of prepped and that people have sent, and I'll throw those in and kind of make sure we get the conversation started. But listeners, I hope that you'll drop your questions in the chat and we will bring those in, or your comments, your thoughts, and we'll bring those into the conversation as well. One of the things I noticed is that you all sort of approach security from different backgrounds, different areas, different perspectives. Maybe we should start by actually defining what security is to you. Byron, let's start with you for this one, and then we'll move around.
Okay, yeah, sure. So me being the I guess the infant or the baby of the group in reference to years of experience in security, to me, so far security to me is very, like I said in the beginning, it's very broad. But I think when it comes to security, we got to start from the beginning, the basics of what security or cybersecurity is. So with that, there's something called the Cia Triad, which is confidentiality, integrity, and availability. And when I learned about Cia Triad, and I learned this from one of my mentors, who's also, a mainframe security engineer. Her name is Kimberly Harris, and she also spoke at Share 3 years ago with me. I learned from Kim, that, security is definitely one of the things that you have to have a broader scope. It can't just be, okay, we're going to protect everything and that's that. No, when it comes to security, you want to protect your assets via the least privilege principle. Who needs access to this and why? Why do you need access? What is the justification? If an auditor comes in and say, hey, you gave this person access as to, you have to explain why. So as I'm still gaining and learning, in this field of security, right now, my focus and kind of philosophy for security is just protecting the assets via the least privilege principle model as of right now. So that's pretty much my scope of how I see security as of right now. And I think that's pretty much it.
Awesome. All right, Byron. So now, Jackie, Byron is coming at it from the least privilege principle, the Cia Triad, and it sounds like a lot of what he's protecting there and a lot of what he's thinking about there is protecting data and assets from anybody doing the wrong thing. I think security includes that for you, but also includes some other things.
Yeah, so I'm a big fan of the Cia Triad. It's just that I think my definition of assets is a little bit more expanded, because to me, people are assets, building are assets, transportation is an asset. So I look at it beyond authentication and access. I look at data location. There's different rules around privacy for data depending what country it's in. Backups, retention, recovery, disaster recovery plans. To me, that's all part of a holistic security plan. And people forget about people. if you really have a security issue, if you can't get hold of the one person that has the one password that you need, then you're down. So to me, that's all built in. And I'm a big fan of layered security. Just because you have a firewall, people take the view that it stops people getting in. But actually, to me, the purpose of a firewall is to let that one port in. And there is technology out there that people can use to tunnel through that. So I'm a huge fan of when you build a system, you build security into every layer all the way out to try to make yourself harder to get up to go after. So I guess that's the point that I would make, Plus, there's also procedural things, like when somebody leaves, what are the procedures in place to make sure that that person's access is removed, preferably before you tell them that they're fired. So, it's all about mitigating damage.
Absolutely. I think mitigating damage is something we can all kind of agree on. Tim, now you kind of come at this from a little bit different perspective from all three of our other guests. They have at least maybe primary focus in the hardware areas, and Jackie and some other of the software, but you come at this particularly from data, from the Guardium software. Tell us what security means to you and how maybe it's a little different or where it's the same.
Yeah, and I like that Byron and Jackie both discussed assets, and then I like that Jackie brought in the layered approach. So from our perspective, being in the data, a lot of what we see is we're the last line of defense. So like Jackie mentioned, people, you put these layered approaches in, firewalls, segregated zones, and such. But when we look at it from a data perspective, we still want to catch something, because not only do you have the outsiders trying to get in and affect data, but you have your insiders that could potentially be a threat. And so from our perspective, while we do look at least privilege access and controlling our assets and things, we see security as a whole for everything. And I think this is where the overlap is, that data is the most important thing in today's environments. And so you have to protect your data, and you can't just assume that because you have a couple layers in that your data is protected. And so we look at it from the monitoring perspective and the security perspective of, we need to know what's happening with the data regardless of where it's coming from, so that we know what the environment looks like, and that we can identify those potential malicious events. And so that's our biggest thing, is that we like the layered approach. Obviously, I have a governance background as well, where we're looking at all the different layers and making sure they're in place. But when it comes down to it, my role today is looking at the data and making sure that it's being used in the appropriate fashion, and that there's nobody accessing it that shouldn't be accessing it.
And then this is the last time that I think I'll go every single person in order like this, because I do hope that this will be more of a conversation. But Julie, I would like to hear any place where security has a different or the same definition for you, coming specifically from the mainframe.
So when I think about security, and over the years, I really think about it as people, infrastructure, applications, and data. And I think what's great is Jackie, Byron, and Tim have all kind of talked about this, and there is not a silver bullet solution that's going to do everything for everybody, but you really need to look at it from that people aspect, the infrastructure being that mainframe, the x86s, the powers, the Unix servers, etc., that application itself that's running, what am I doing from a security aspect to make sure I'm not doing any backdoors, as well as, like Tim had said, with the data itself. Because when you really think about it over the years, it's all about looking at that risk assessment. What am I going to do to mitigate the risk to my environment? What from a corporation standpoint, what can I afford? And it's interesting because nowadays, when you look at this, is business continuity, which is really the buzzword is called resiliency, is more aligned with security now than ever before. It used to really be that disaster recovery and security, but really the two are meshing together. And what are you doing to make sure that that infrastructure, that area, your environment is secured? And it really is looking about beyond just the mainframe that's out there. So I kind of pull it all together and look at it from people, infrastructure, applications, and data.
I like that you guys are giving me some ways to think about security that, well, you talked about layers, but it seems like we are talking about layers, like a little bit of an onion that kind of builds out from the different layers. Now, you all kind of work in different environments, different areas of technology. It sounds like a lot of your philosophy overlaps, but are there some places where you think there's a divergence or something that you think maybe other people won't be thinking about in terms of philosophy that we should talk about? Tim, do you want to start us?
Sure. Yeah, I like I said, I think our divergence just probably comes mostly from the fact that I mean, we do rely on the what these other areas are doing, but our biggest thing is, I mean, we're watching the data specifically, and you know, we don't really have a direct threat actor, I guess to say. Like I mentioned, you know, from a insider outsider perspective, you know, we kind of treat everyone as doing something wrong until they're, you know, we can prove that they're doing what they need to be doing. So you know, we do a lot of analytics and things like that, and so I think ours is probably that divergence.
Jackie or
Yeah.
anyone else? Do you want to comment on?
I think Julie, Byron, and I are pretty well aligned, even though I work primarily in Unix. Because I came out of the mainframe background, my attitude is always, you get nothing until you can give me a reason why. And more recently, I've been working a lot on the cloud environment. I secure those systems the same way I used to secure my mainframe and I secure my Unix systems. I lock everything down until I have to open it up. And I think that it might be called paranoid, but I think it's the safest way you apply those layers. The only things you have to sort of think about really more in the cloud is the location of your data. Because I wrote a presentation a few years ago, and the one line I said in it was, don't try telling the SEC that the cloud ate your data. It's not going to fly. But I think we're fairly well aligned. I think Tim's focus is more just on the data. But I don't think our strategy really is that different. We all want to protect it from anyone.
Well, now you brought up an interesting topic there, Jackie, and Julie or Byron, feel free to jump in if you had something to add there. But we did get a question from one of the listeners out there who's actually asking about the data security while deploying applications in the cloud, so in Kubernetes, in Docker. And what about the security when you have the cloud native apps? It sounds like you've been thinking about that, Jackie, and I'm sure the rest of you all have as well. What should we say about this today?
Well, so what you're running your apps on is an operating system. Even though it's in the cloud, it might be OS 390, it might be ZeOS as they call it now, it might be Linux, it might be AIX, it could be IBM I, whatever it is. You still have to do the due diligence as an admin to secure those systems. It makes no difference that it's in the cloud. There are some specifics about being in the cloud. The presentation I wrote actually started with the 25 questions you should ask, and number one was, what was your exit strategy? How do you get your data out of the cloud if you need to get out of the cloud? And I'm thinking that's something that Tim would probably have some pretty strong comments on. But to me, it's no different. Apart from the fact that there's the potential that somebody that I don't know might have administrator access to my systems.
Yeah, I mean, that's always the thing that I want to think about, right? Is cloud just means it's someone else's computer. And so, Julie or Byron or Tim, how do you account for that when you talk to people who are building cloud native apps and that it's it's somewhere else in terms of some of these things that you might be used to being able to secure.
Yeah. Oh, go ahead, Julie.
So from my standpoint, it really is. I mean, you're right. It's that due diligence that you need to do with it. You know, what are you doing? What is that vendor or wherever you're at to secure that? What is that application that's out there? What is that change process that's going through? I mean, when you think of it, and some of the background that I've come where I've worked is, you know, as an application programmer, what are your due diligence to make sure that that code is only doing what it's supposed to be doing? Or is it one of these things that you're running short on time, so security kind of falls by the wayside? So you've opened up some things to make sure it's available. You know, I've got to get this application to the cloud, so maybe I'm not going to be as careful with some of my coding techniques. Or when you think about just some of the things that are out there, some of the same common threats have been out there for a long time, and people still continue to do them over and over again.
So I hear you saying, don't let speed, even in, you know, agile, fast-moving workspaces, be the enemy of the secure. And, you know, don't sort of change your best practices just because you're building for some other system. Am I hearing that kind of accurately?
Right. And when you think about a lot of these tools that help with application development, a lot of times the easiest way to get them up and running is just saying, you know what, I'll take defaults, or I'll open all the stuff up by default to everybody, which all of a sudden now I'm creating applications via a software tool that maybe is not set up as securely as it should be set up.
Right. Tim, I know you wanted to jump in, and then maybe Byron or Jackie has anything to add.
Yeah, I think, you know, the cloud, it introduces a unique perspective when it comes to data. And Libby, you kind of mentioned this around administrative access and the thought that we have to, you know, understand that there are people out there that have elevated privileges to these systems that we don't control. And Jackie, you know, the interesting point that I think I bring up in this, and from a governance perspective, but also from a data perspective, is you know, you have to understand going into these systems who those people are going to be and how you're going to monitor them. And I saw Jen had dropped a question into our chat about you know, is there lag around the development of it was specifically asked around Guardium as opposed to Imperva, but I think there's a lag that's being addressed by a lot of these vendors, you know, around the cloud solutions. And I know IBM's doing a ton of work around Guardium and monitoring the cloud, but it is a unique scenario where you know, you can't necessarily install client in these environments because it opens up monitoring to other people's environments, and because of the shared configurations. And another you know, thing that people don't think about is a lot of these environments have servers being stood up and dropped and recreated, and when you talk about client-based monitoring, that's not possible, because how do you get a client deployed to something that gets stood up for a couple of seconds and drop back down just to kind of help support a workload? And so there's a lot of work going on in the data space and the monitoring space, trying to utilize the technologies that are available, and the monitoring and the logs that, you know, a lot of people are trying to address today. So from a development standpoint, like I said, I know IBM's doing a lot of work. I'm sure Imperva's doing work. You know, I know that there are other companies out there doing work. So it's something that's being addressed today, but I won't say any one company's ahead of the other, because there's just so many technologies. Everyone's trying to get them all, and it just takes time.
Libby, I just want to add on one thing. So we talked about administrators that have access that we don't know where they're physically located or where they're from. But the other thing that people need to be asking their cloud providers is who has physical access and what are your policies on that? Because what's to stop somebody that has physical access coming in, taking the server and walking out the door with it? These are the questions that we all understand for our own data centers. But once you go into the cloud, they're questions you should be asking your providers before you sign anything.
That
Yeah,
makes
in
sense.
addition
I
to-
remember when I was, oh, go ahead, Byron, please.
Oh, no. I was just going to chime in just to piggyback off of everyone's, comments. They pretty much hit the nail on the head with this. But one of the things that I wanted to bring up, one of the things that I was currently looking into would be the data privacy passports technology that IBM released. Now, data privacy passport, it allows you to take your data off your system and send it out to a data lake, or, and it sits there. But what I like about data privacy passports is the fact that you can control and mitigate the access. You can revoke access or grant access to that specific data that was eligible enough to be encrypted in the first place. So my views on cloud, I've been hearing cloud since my sophomore year in college. That was a long time ago. And I've kind of always been on the fence about cloud, but I mean, it's great. It's awesome. It gives advanced technologies for the entire industry to continue to grow. But as a security practitioner, specifically for the mainframe space with all this critical data, or even Guardium or AIX or Power, when we talk about cloud, we have to make sure that security should be the focus. What I've noticed in my tenure with, in the mainframe space, or in general, just reading articles and reviewing, live streams, a lot of applications are made without the thought of security. Security is always the after fact. Okay, let's create this Apple ID or some app and we'll push it out to the market. Then it's security after the fact. In this day and age, I think and I recommend that in order for us to continue to grow with this digital transformation, we should start considering security as much as we consider the change management process or the changing of the code migration, et cetera. Security should be your number one priority when you have an asset or a software per se. So that's pretty much all I wanted to touch on with this cloud thing, because you guys already pretty much covered it all, but it's definitely one of those sensitive topics that I would love to talk with any of our listeners about, because this is definitely a discussion that we need to have as an industry to continue to grow as an industry.
Byron, you brought up a couple of really good things there that I want to kind of pick out a little bit. First of all, I like the fact that you talked about the digital transformation that we're all going through, that may have been even accelerated for a lot of companies because of the quarantining issues, and how security can't be an afterthought there. How do you educate people so that they, number one, make security the first thought, not the last thought, and number two, so that they sort of stay up to date? I heard you talking about some of the things you review. You talked about a mentor. I know you've talked before about Julie being one of your mentors in the past. What do you tell people this is where you need to be keeping your eye on so that security is primary when you're talking about these digital transformations?
Well, Libby, first, that's a great question. So I'll start off by saying this: when people come to me, it's specifically about mainframe or mainframe security. So one of the things that I have to share with the listeners before I get into my conversation is I teach everyone and tell everyone, if you want to get into the mainframe and mainframe security, understand or have an foundational understanding of how the actual mainframe works. If you have a basic understanding of how it operates, then you can apply your security to the way that the mainframe operates. Because mainframe security and Windows 10 or Apple or AIX, everybody's security is a little bit different. No matter how you see it, the main goal here is understand the operating system or environment that you're on, and then apply your security. That's the first piece. The second piece, as far as keeping people engaged and learning to continue to enhance their skills, one of the places that I go to a lot is typically what we all do. You go to Google, I read articles from Forbes, I read articles from when NIST release anything, NIST, or it would be Department of Defense has DISA STIGs, which STIG stands for Security Technical Implementation Guides. They're kind of like security, quote unquote, best practices. So I'm always constantly reading articles and reading manuals and learning, you know, so it's the public information that's out there. But when it's geared towards mainframe, I'm reaching out to the mainframe community, the IBM Z community I'm a part of, the IBM Champion community I'm a part of. And it's always a constant learning, you know, and that's one of the key to anything in life is to continue to learn. But in reference to your point and your question is, my recommendation, if you want to really get into security, understand the environment that you want to get into, understand the platform that you want to protect, then apply your security principles.
One of you guys want to jump in and piggyback on or connect with what Byron has said? Because I know you guys have stuff to say. I'll go ahead, Jackie. You're smiling at me.
Byron's right about understanding the architecture of the operating system. You know, I do a lot of security work on Linux and on AIX, and what I'm finding is things that you do in Linux, you don't need to do in AIX, but there's things I do in AIX that are different, and they're different again to the mainframe. And the approach I've also found for security depends on what the background is of the administrators. You know, typically people that come from a mainframe background like I did and like Byron are more paranoid. We don't want to give anybody anything unless they beg. And then we still will say no. So I think a lot of the approach comes from, number one, what your background is, but secondly, you have to understand those operating system characteristics. And, you know, I also want to add on to it that I'm a big advocate of common sense security. You know, I've talked about layers, but common sense. I don't think anybody on this stream appreciates being given a 25-character password with hieroglyphics and all kinds of other things, and then being told, by the way, you have to memorize this. We all know you're going to walk away and write it down. So there needs to be common sense applied to how we do security, but it also needs to be robust. So that's all I have to say.
Well, I don't actually believe that, Jackie, but we'll let Tim take a turn.
Yeah, you know, I think taking a step back is important with this. You know, you ask how do you keep other users, non-security folks, kind of in the loop of what's going on, and where can we point them? And I think the important thing is, and our company has been trying to get a good program together, and I think we're starting to get a good grasp on this. But I think you can, providing them the information is probably one of your best approaches. Use your security resources and the people that are tied to security and interested in it to help other non-security folks understand the risks and understand what's going on in the world. And our company we do a monthly kind of newsletter that we send out and say, here's what's going on, and here's things to be aware of. Hey, don't let people piggyback into the building. That like Jackie's been talking about from physical security. If somebody gets into your building, it's very easy for them to then navigate because people see them as an employee. And it's the same with other security risks. A lot of people don't hear about breaches and 0-day vulnerabilities and these things right away if they're not looking for them. And so our culture has changed to kind of inform them of what they aren't aware of and make sure that they're listening. Keep reminding them of phishing, keep reminding them of the simple things that people do to get access, so that they just kind of always have it in the back of their mind.
Anybody want to jump in and say anything else related to that? Because otherwise I've got another direction that I want to kind of take us in. Julie, did you want to add anything to what these guys were saying?
No, thank you. I'm good.
All right. So the other place that I kind of wanted to take this, again, kind of starting from where Byron was talking before, is around, and I wrote it down and then my brain went, how does in our current environment of, so many people working remotely and so many differences in the way that we're all approaching things right now, do you think that that is having an impact on what you do as the technical security person? I guess I'm kind of asking, like, how much is the end user? Is it affecting you more? Is it kind of business as usual? If you were doing it right, we shouldn't have to change anything. Do you feel there's more risk, different risk? Julie, do you want to start us off?
Sure, thank you. I guess obviously there's more risks when you think of some of this, depending on what is happening, especially recently, is a lot of times people are doing more with maybe their personal devices versus company-owned devices that may have some other monitoring capabilities that are in there. I'm always very conscious of what I'm doing with my personal devices to make sure that they're secure. But it really is just kind of that awareness out there. You've heard the stories about somebody going, well, I've got a company iPad and I let my kids go out and do this with it, and, or vice versa. I see Jackie laughing at this, or, vice versa. I've got my own personal iPad and I'm out doing, I happen to download a file to my iPad to read it or something like that. But just making people more aware of it, especially when you read some of the things of, the drive-by people that can actually see, open networks and things that are in your environment. What are you really doing to secure your home-based network more so now than ever that's out there? Or I was just listening to an article this week about, just all the phishing attacks that are out there. There's so many of them out there now, and even when they get your cell phone number, you start getting texts. You've got to be a lot more aware and continuing to try and stay one step ahead of all those people are going to try to compromise your data. So I think it's kind of really ramped up because there's more focus on a lot of it. And I know, like, IBM X-Force has talked, like, some of the statistic numbers are unbelievable, like a 4,700% increase on spamming and phishing attacks and everything else like that. It's just phenomenal right now what's happening.
So do we need to, and excuse me, Jackie, I think you wanted to add something. Go ahead. And then I
was just going to add to it that one of the biggest issues with people having to work from home is that we've all had to become security specialists. So we have to secure our Wi-Fi and our networks. I keep my data on an encrypted drive because I don't want to have somebody take that. But we have all these issues that we don't normally have to do, and things like keeping your systems patched. People don't think about that. And it's not just Windows, it's your iPad, it's your iPhone, it's the applications. And it's actually become somewhat, I was going to say draconian, but it's very, very difficult to keep up with. But if you don't keep up with it, you will absolutely get hacked. And you don't even have to have anything interesting to become a target. People are just trying for crimes of opportunity. So I think working from home, and I've worked from home for quite a few years, you really do have to pay attention to the actual security and also backups and things like that at home, which a lot of people don't think about that. So it's just something to put out there that people need to start thinking about, is your actual home security, your network security, all the stuff that you kind of take for granted.
So speaking either to sort of the home users or the folks who are trying to corral all of us home users, where is your number one, this is my go-to, if you don't read anything else about security this week, you have to go there, place? Where's your place? Where's your thing? Byron, you want to start us out? Or I know you already mentioned one, the I forgot the acronym already. The
DoD.
resource guides.
Yeah. It's so many outlets now that you can catch up on about security. But one of the guys that I reach out to is, of course, Wired, lifehacker.com. I kind of stay in the security realm. I want to mingle with my other fellow security professionals. So I kind of stay in that realm. I even tapped into the hacker realm as well, because my philosophy as well comes from a standpoint of you can't protect nothing if you don't know how it breaks. If you know how it breaks, you can protect it. But if you don't, you can't protect it fully. And again, me being still the youngest as far as years wise in security, I'm still gaining experiences. Coming from, like Jackie mentioned, coming from a sysproud background, I'm a systems programmer, so I know the ins and outs of my architect. So from a security standpoint, although I'm just mainframe, my mentor, Kimberly Harris, again, she shared to me, Byron, you have to stop being focused just on mainframe. And I said, well, why would you say that? She said, because the mainframe is one environment, but it interacts with different environments. You have the Apples, the AWS, the Azure, et cetera. And when she said that to me, I said, oh, snap, I never thought of that. So I started to engage, Microsoft developers. I even attended this past year, even attended a conference with I believe it's called Blacks in Cybersecurity, where I met this gentleman. Name is Dr. Mansour Hasid. And I have this quote that I want to share that really changed my perception. In his book that I'm reading, the book is titled Cybersecurity. Where's the book? I have to find the book. But the quote that I want to say is, cybersecurity or security is not a technology discipline. It is a business discipline. And in his book, he explains it eloquently that in order for us to really continue to change and improve with technology, as fast as technology advances, we have to start shifting our mindset to say that security should not just be focused on technology. It should be the business discipline as well. So that's pretty much all I have to say in reference to that.
All right. Well, I think that's good, because we don't want to just be the tech area that lets you get into we'll just install it because it's cool. But if we're part of the business, then it's central. I like that. Who else is going to tell me where your tech mentees have to go? Luke, I want to hear from you.
Well, so yeah, I have something to mention here.
But you're muted.
Oh, am I muted? I shouldn't be. I am not muted. Why am I?
Not anymore.
Okay, great.
I can hear you now.
I can hear you now. Okay, great. The thing I was going to mention is, in addition to Rosalind, I got to speak with a bunch of the other speakers at the IBM Cloud Native Security Conference, which ran yesterday, today, and is going to also be on July 1st. And there's the link for it below. And the thing I was going to mention is, so Dan Walsh from Red Hat said to me, he said, developers only do two things. They write their code or they disable security. And I thought that was really interesting. And then it parlays also into, I got to speak with the VP of security at IBM, Bob Kulka, and he also said that, yes, and I think this parlays into what Byron was saying, that yes, this is a technical discipline for security, but really it is about working with the people. And this is my question for all of you, is one of the things that he said was that, because so often the security team is the one who is having to be a little bit of the disciplinarian, having to, say no, or having to, get permission from them, it creates a little bit of a strange dynamic where people maybe want to avoid you because they're afraid you're going to say no. So what, and I think this ties into the DevSecOps, like how do we work together as a team when people kind of see the security as being, oh, they're just going to say no to me?
Hey, Luke, I think that you brought up a good point, and it's like we've all said before, and we got to stop putting security on the back burner. The more we continue to do that, the more issues we're going to cause ourselves. So if we come from a mindset of, okay, let's have security in mind when we're creating this application or this process or new methodology, we would be more better off, So I agree,
I just have to laugh at one of the questions that came in.
Yeah,
they're
I just saw
asking
it.
which of you was a hacker.
So
Who has been a hacker?
Part of my job used to actually be penetration testing. So I used to get the VP to sign authorization so that I could hack into any system in the company, but not outside the company. So that's not really a hacker.
Internal approved hacking.
But I will say that penetration testing, when it's done legitimately, is a lot of fun.
I bet it is, as long as it's done with approval.
Oh, I used to get it in writing from the VP before I'd do anything, because it's a very dangerous thing and it can get you fired. I wanted to add to the comments about where you get information from, because IBM actually has some great notifications. So from an AIX and IBMI perspective, we can go and get the hyper notifications that come to you automatically. And we can also, for AIX, there's a thing called Flirt VC that will actually do an internal penetration test on your system. It actually checks to make sure you have all the latest patches. And then there's a couple of conferences I used to go to, and I also belong to a group called the HTCIA, which is actually a law enforcement sponsored organization, the High Tech Crime Investigators Association. And I get a lot of information from them. And in fact, I'm going to be going to an online presentation, I think it's in a couple of weeks, actually on finding out about cloud penetrations. So there's a lot of organizations out there, a lot of conferences and materials out there. The hard thing is narrowing it down to something that becomes manageable, because you can get overwhelmed just with I still get the emails from CERT, which is now DOD, and I get way too many of them. So it's hard.
Yeah, and just to chime in on that, Jackie, another one of the places where I get information from is the DOD, the DISA stakes. And although they're quote unquote like security practices, it's a lot of information on there about the infrastructure or the platform or software that you're using. And it gives you the best practices on how you should set it up, so, and that's approved by the DOD. So that's one of the places that I read information about different products. It can be about Apple products, Google, et cetera. So getting information is easily nowadays, but I think the problem is, like Jackie said, it's so much information. How do you mitigate and manage the correct information that applies to what you do daily? And how does it align with your goals? Yeah.
And the problem with that is that, like you said, you cannot be monofocused. You work on a mainframe, but your mainframe, I'll bet you, has TCP/IP on it. So you're immediately on the network. So now you have to understand a little bit more about firewalls and network security, and so on. And that's one of the things I think that we all struggle with is, if we were just doing ACF2 or RACF on the mainframe, life would be easier. But it's not. It's how do we deal with those network users that are now coming in through the firewalls and so on. And I think one of the big issues we face is that it's always been an us or them. People who work in security are the bad guys because you stopped me doing my job. And I think we have to work on the public relations side of security so that people understand that, we're in this together, and it doesn't matter what we do technically from a security point of view. One person letting one bad guy in the front door or applying to a phishing attack can take out your whole business. So it's all of us, not just the security people.
So unintentionally, Jackie, you kind of went back to Luke's question, which I did want to get back to as well, around how do you bridge that gap between the security folks saying no and people getting their jobs done. And I come from a governance kind of audit background, but then focused on security. And the biggest thing we did was we do have to say no to people around, someone comes in and just says, hey, I need admin access. I need root access to this Linux box. And it's like, well, hold on. We're obviously going to say no to that. But we always ask the question, well, what do you really need to be doing? It's not that I'm telling you can't have access. I'm telling you that you can't have the level of access that you're asking for. So what are you going to be doing? And let me figure out what I can give you so that you can still do your job, but in a secure fashion. And I think that's our biggest thing. And like I said, with the governance side of things, there are regulations and best practices and things for security and the regulatory, the federal requirements and things like that. So it's not when they come to us, or when, Luke, like you said, people would start to try to avoid you when you're saying no too much, is we don't say no, we say no, but let me help you. So let's get an understanding, and then I'll tell you what you can't have, and then if you can't have something, why?
Yeah, and the quick thing I see.
There's so many. Go ahead.
Oh no, I was just saying the book that everyone that I was referring to is this book here, Cybersecurity Leadership by Dr. Cybersecurity himself. His name is Mansour Hasib, and this book is very, very interesting. It has expanded my scope on how I look at security, how I align my security with the way I do things, day-to-day tasks, and how I can make sure that my day-to-day tasks align with the company's vision and goals.
There's so many interesting pieces that you guys are bringing up. Byron brought up the idea that there's so much out there, and Jackie, there's a million things. Before we leave the topic of what would you tell people, where would you tell them to go to? Julie, you're a long time expert in this field. You've written half of the material that people go to learn about it. Where do you still go as an expert on a regular basis?
I was hoping you wouldn't ask me that question, because there is no one definitive thing. I mean, I am hooked into so many different blogs and skimming things, and just looking at some of that. One of the things that I was actively doing, and I still am actively doing, is and I see one of the comments in the chat, when you think of the mainframe as 55 plus years old, the RACF, the ACF2, and top secret securities is probably 40 plus years old for sure. Top secret's a little bit younger than that. When you think about that, a lot of what I was talking to people is, did you set it, forget it? And it's hard. It's hard to keep up with stuff. When from a ZOS aspect, when IBM comes out with new releases, is just going through and reading some of the things and skimming them from a security aspect. But it is hard to keep current on a lot of this stuff, because it's just coming at you so fast and furious. But it's nice to take things like the X-Force that kind of summarizes some of these things. It does some of the work for you. But again, there is no one definitive thing that I'm out looking at all the time. It's just I'm looking at a lot of different things, getting those different viewpoints that are out there.
Now, are there tools that you all use to make it easier? Because this does sound like it's just this immense, huge job. What is there? Are there some tools, or, I know, Tim, you and I had talked a little bit about, is there any way that you're bringing in machine learning or AI to help with this task?
Yeah, that's, I think, like all of them I mentioned, there's just so much information out there. You kind of have to just, weed through it and try and understand what you can. And I think, a good, approach, you have to have experts in all these areas, but, talk with them. I'm not a mainframe expert, but if I talk to some of them, I'm going to understand where the shortcomings are, what the current risks are. If I talk to the power people or AIX, network people, you have to collaborate. Collaboration is a huge piece of security. I think one of the things that sticks with me most in most of our Guardium user groups, and when I'm at these IBM conferences or other security conferences, is the bad guys are working together. There isn't a single piece of code that most of them write that isn't shared amongst each other, or if they find a backdoor into something, they're telling every single person they know. Well, as security folks, we have to do that as well. If I'm working on something and I find a major flaw, I have to let people know about it, because there's no way to protect yourself against something you don't know about. So with what you mentioned around, machine learning and AI, where we see the biggest benefit, especially around, the analytics, is, a computer can do things far faster than humans can do it. So if there's a task that you can offload to a machine that can look at millions of activities as opposed to thousands, let it chug through those kind of monotonous, well-known items, like Byron and Jackie have mentioned around the mainframe of like not giving people access. If you can have something, looking through that access to make sure nothing's, gotten elevated, or, these people don't have certain rights. Like, why have a person go through and evaluate every one of your users? And then, Julie kind of had this, mentality that, people get into have set it and forget it. They think that I turn security on and I don't have to ever look at it again. And that's, obviously not true. And so where you can utilize machines and this AI of being able to recognize these patterns, just gives a huge benefit to security. And I know I'm seeing a lot of development in the data space around having those machines do that. But it's still, again, there's some implementation effort and things that go on in it, but it has been a huge benefit to the security area.
Anyone else want to jump in on that tools question before we go around and sort of everybody take a last chance to share anything that you want folks to know about security in your area of expertise or your platform?
I can't agree. I mean, I agree a lot with what Tim is saying. Is I used to be one of those people that, yeah, I can write a tool to do this and I can write something to do this, but if there's tools that are out there and available, there's not going to be one tool that's going to do everything. Usually you need to look at it from a solution aspect. And that's where, like, even the security information event management solutions kind of come into play, is to be able to look at your enterprise holistically. But I walked into so many shops where they said, we wrote a tool to do X. Well, when's the last time you looked at that tool? 15 years ago. Well, things have changed a lot in the last 15 years. It's hard to keep up with that. And like Tim said, as people are, handing out code differently, but you've got to think about, you just can't keep up with some of the changes that are happening, that are going on in just the mainframe security and just the other areas. But again, there's not going to be one tool that's going to do everything you need. You really need to look at from a solution aspect of, is it really going to help you? That's kind of where I come back to the people, infrastructure, applications, and data, looking at things holistically across your enterprise.
All right, Jackie or Byron, any last words about building on what Tim and Julie have said about tools, or about anything we've talked about?
So, I mean, with AIX, we do have some tools for doing things like Flirt VC, which IBM provides. But to me, the biggest things are things like backups, especially offsite ones. And I actually script all my security hardening so that they're self-documenting scripts, because what people forget to do is document things. If you actually document what you do to secure a system, then you can go back, rather than having to go in and like reread the tool and figure out what you did. You should be able to read that documentation and go, oh, wait, these like hypers have come out and they're basically telling me there's some new vulnerabilities that I need to add to the tool. What I see lacking, particularly on some of the older stuff, is documentation. And without documentation, you're never going to recover.
And that's a good point. I was actually going to talk about documentation. I think that's the most critical and most important tool that anybody could have, is documentation. The more documentation that you have, and that you have could be used as a key to continue to help you do whatever your task is. So having documentation is the most critical thing or tool that you can have, in my opinion. Everyone has pretty much said some great thoughts, and I don't have anything to say, but I do agree, Jackie, that documentation is one of the tools that I think everyone should at least have and understand the documentation as well.
And I'm pretty anal retentive about it. I mean, when I do an installation, I pre-document the whole install. I don't actually touch the keyboard till I've documented everything, and then I tweak it as I go through. And I do the same with security. And for the reason that sometimes you're doing this at 3 or 4 in the morning, and I'm not usually awake then. But secondly, it's so much easier when there's a problem later, you can go back and see what you did. So yeah, I think it's critical, and I hate documentation. We all do.
But I think you guys talked about, I think you guys talked about this in our sort of prep conversations as well, that those starting point documents, some of which come from the vendor, some of which you create, and then you tailor them to your specific environment that you're working in. And then of course you got to kind of keep them updated, just like everything else you guys are saying. Well, we have hit the top of the hour, and I just have to say how grateful I am to have had all of you here on the call today, and how much I feel like even I'm not a security expert, but I've learned so much from you, and I hope that the folks listening and watching either live or to the recording will have learned a lot. And of course, keep passing on your questions. The champions are amazing at answering these, even when we're not live streaming. You'll see on the bottom of the screen is our ibm.biz/champions. You can keep up with what the next presentations, the next live streams will be, and where else you can find the champions, other conferences, other events, their blogs, etc. So, thank you guys. If anybody has anything else to add, Luke, thank you for co-hosting, keeping us all honest, everything. Thanks, you guys. Ooh,
thanks for having us.
And you know what? I want to rephrase that. I've just been reading a whole bunch about the particular use of you guys, and I even live in Texas. So I'm going to say instead, thanks, y'all. Thank you all very much for being part of this.
Thank you.
All right. Well, we'll see y'all next time. Thanks so much.